Hello, welcome to Explain My Brain. I'm Sophie, I'm a trainee clinical psychologist, and in this video we're going to be exploring addiction, and in particular, whether we're addicted to our own phones. So addiction is commonly associated with overdependence on things like alcohol, nicotine, illegal drugs, and even caffeine. Addiction is often thought of as a physical thing, and is associated with things like withdrawal, tolerance, and feeling out of control. But there is also such a thing as a behavioural addiction, and there are some symptom similarities between behavioural addictions and substance addictions, which we'll explore later in this video. Although many experts disagree that behavioural addictions are real addictions, the most recent edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders now explicitly includes behaviours in the addictions category. Gambling disorder is the first and so far only officially recognised behavioural addiction in the psychological world. Outside of the psychological world, the media has welcomed the concept of many other behavioural addictions, such as sex addictions, shopping addictions, and video game addictions. To understand a bit more about addictions, we've got to talk about dopamine. Dopamine is a type of chemical called a neurotransmitter, which is found inside your brain. Dopamine helps us to regulate movement, attention, learning, and our emotional responses. But it's also hugely involved in making us feel pleasure and satisfaction. Dopamine is released when we're presented with a reward, like our favourite food, exercising, or a successful social interaction. Dopamine is what makes us change our behaviour in order to seek a reward and feel great. And even anticipating a reward can release dopamine. For example, gambling triggers the brain's reward system because you can win a lot of money. This idea of this reward releases dopamine and makes us feel pleasure and generally just great. After gambling for a while, your brain can develop a gambling tolerance. In other words, your brain has got used to the amount of dopamine that is released when you gamble, and therefore you feel less pleasure and the thrill deteriorates. Your brain has become conditioned and therefore needs more dopamine to trigger the reward system. So your dopamine system motivates you to go and gamble even more. This high tolerance build-up makes it more and more difficult for you to ignore the cravings to gamble when you're not gambling. So lots of research has been done on gambling behaviour and dopamine release, which has proven it worthy to become a recognised addiction. But how does this all relate to phones? Well, of course, there's nothing particularly addictive about the physical phone itself, but it's the huge social network that we have instant access to that we're talking about. More research is definitely needed, but if you look at some of the symptoms that are used to diagnose substance addictions, there are definitely some that relate to phone use. For example, impaired control. Can you ignore your phone if you get a notification, or if you see it lying on your bed? Or do you sometimes find yourself endlessly scrolling through social media for no reason at all? Another symptom is social impairment. This is recurrent use that might interfere with your work or stop you from being fully engaged in social situations. How many times have you been hanging out with friends and you've realised you're all on your phones and you're actually not talking to each other at all? Another symptom is risky use of the substance in this case being the phone. It's no secret that some people use their phones whilst driving or whilst crossing the road, and these are all risky behaviours that could lead to accidents due to using phones. And it's not just the behavioural symptoms of phone use that can be linked to substance addiction. Research has shown that notifications from your phone release dopamine. When you're online or you're talking to a friend, we're almost getting instant gratification, so that reward is released immediately. For example, if you want to talk to a friend right away, just drop them a message. It's easy to get into a dopamine-induced loop. Dopamine motivates you to go on social media, you get rewarded, which makes you use it more. It becomes harder and harder for you to stop checking Instagram, stop checking that you've got messages from other people, and ignore notifications. Another thing about dopamine is that it loves unpredictability. When something happens that's not exactly predictable, that stimulates our dopamine system. So notifications on our phone pop up, we don't know when exactly they're going to come up, and we don't know who exactly they're going to be from. This is the unpredictability that dopamine loves. Sometimes you might not get a message back for a long time, and this can be disappointing to us as we don't get our reward instantly like we're used to. But eventually, when that message does come through, our dopamine release will be higher than it would have been. It's unpredictable, and it's exactly what the dopamine system thrives on, so it makes your phone seem even more exciting. It's similar to gambling, because every time you check your phone for a notification, it's basically the same as playing the slot machine to see if you're going to win any money. Sometimes you have a notification, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you win something, sometimes you don't. And this unpredictability has actually been designed into some social media platforms to take advantage of your dopamine system. Instagram's notification algorithms will sometimes withhold likes on your photos and then deliver them in a big burst later on. So when you post a photo, you might be disappointed at first because you don't get the big response that you were expecting. Because of this designed disappointment, your dopamine system will actually respond stronger to the sudden flood of positive social interaction. This technique takes advantage of our dopamine-driven desire for social validation, and it optimizes the balance of negative and positive feedback signals until we've become habitual users. So how can you help yourself stop checking your phone all the time? Well, one thing that might help is getting rid of notification alerts. Change the settings on your phone so that you don't receive the automatic notifications. Automatic notifications are great as you never miss anything, but they're actually causing you to be like a rat in a cage. If you want to get your work done, you need to turn off as many auditory and visual cues as possible. Turning your phone onto grayscale mode can also help, as the bright colours have been shown to be rewarding for our brains. Another tip is to remove any apps that are notification heavy away from your home screen, so that when you unlock your phone, they're harder to spot. Using all of these top tips can help break your dopamine loop and reduce the desire to check your phone. So your phone behaviour might tick off some of the behavioural symptoms of addiction, but there's other things that don't quite add up, like withdrawal and tolerance. Although, if you've ever misplaced your phone or forgotten to take it with you somewhere, you might have experienced a mild state of panic until it's back in your hands. And you're not alone, as research shows that about 73% of people claim to experience this kind of anxiety. You could argue that this anxiety is a withdrawal symptom, but again, your phone does give you a lot of security because you're able to contact anyone at any time if something goes wrong or if there's an emergency. So perhaps addiction is too strong a word to use when we're talking about us and our phones. But this doesn't mean that using your phone all the time is good for you. Our technology is changing quickly, so our behaviour probably will too. But every once in a while, just ask yourself, is using my phone making me feel good or not so good?